In 1967, Sidney Poitier was the biggest black star in Hollywood. Then he vanished. No movies, no TV shows, nothing. For 6 whole years. His own friends couldn't reach him. The crazy part? It happened right after he made history with 3 hit movies in the same year. What really happened that made him run away from fame when he was at the very top? The answer will leave you speechless. Sidney Poitier was born on February 20th, 1927, in Miami, Florida. His parents, Reginald and Evelyn, had traveled from Cat Island in the Bahamas to sell tomatoes. He arrived prematurely, so small and fragile that his father doubted he would survive. Preparing for the worst, he even bought a tiny casket. But against all odds, Sidney pulled through. His parents took him back to Cat Island, where life was simple but tough. There was no electricity, no running water, and no paved roads. His family lived off the land, growing food and fishing. Money was scarce. Like many poor children, Sidney wore clothes made from flour sacks. He went to a small school when he could, but there wasn't much to learn. By the time he was 12, school was no longer an option. He had to work. When Sidney was almost 11, his family moved to Nassau. It was the first time he saw a city, the first time he saw his own reflection in a glass window. It was also where he saw his first movies. The big screens, the lights, the actors, they fascinated him. But Nassau had its dangers too. His parents worried about his future, especially after one of his childhood friends was sent to reform school. They feared Sidney might end up the same way. At 15, he left for Miami to join his older brother. He had never experienced racism the way he did in the Jim Crow South. Segregation controlled everything. There were places he wasn't allowed to go, jobs he couldn't have, and rules that made no sense. He worked as a delivery boy, but the real danger came from the police. One night, 5 white officers followed him for 35 blocks. He hadn't committed a crime. He hadn't done anything at all. But he knew what could happen if they caught him. He had to leave. At 16, he made it to New York City with almost no money. He had no family there, no friends, no place to stay. He slept on rooftops, park benches, and inside bus stations. Sometimes, when he was lucky, he found shelter in an orphanage. But winter in New York was brutal, and he was running out of options. He was arrested for vagrancy more than once, just for being homeless. Desperate, he found another way out. He lied about his age and joined the U.S. Army. They sent him to a veterans hospital, where he was assigned to work with psychiatric patients. The conditions were terrible. He saw treatments that shocked him, things he couldn't stand to be part of. He needed to escape, so he faked a mental illness. It worked. He was discharged. Back in New York, he was still struggling, still homeless, but now he had a goal: acting. He auditioned for the American Negro Theater. It did not go well. He could barely read the script. His thick Caribbean accent made the directors laugh. Embarrassed, he walked away. But he refused to give up. If reading was the problem, he would learn. At night, while washing dishes at a restaurant, he met an elderly Jewish waiter who noticed his struggle. The man offered to teach him. They sat together after hours, going over words from newspapers. Sidney practiced every night, sounding out letters, learning punctuation, memorizing speech patterns from radio broadcasts. After months of work, he tried again. He walked back into the American Negro Theater, ready this time. This time, no one laughed. Sidney Poitier's first major role came in 1950 with No Way Out. This was not just a breakthrough for him, but also a bold statement in Hollywood. The film, directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, told a story that many studios at the time avoided. Poitier played Dr. Luther Brooks, a young black doctor accused of killing a white patient. The patient's brother, Ray Biddle, played by Richard Widmark, refuses to accept the truth. His racism fuels the tension, leading to a violent race riot. This film stood out because it tackled racism head-on. It showed a black man in a position of authority, something rarely seen in movies back then. Poitier's performance was powerful. He played a character who was smart, capable, and determined to stand by his morals. Audiences were not used to seeing black actors in such roles. They were used to seeing them as side characters, servants, or comic relief. No Way Out challenged that, making a strong impact. Despite playing bitter enemies on screen, Poitier and Widmark became good friends. Widmark respected Poitier's talent, and their bond lasted for years. This contrast between reality and fiction made the film even more significant. It was a reflection of real racial tensions in the country, but it also proved that change was possible. Poitier had no interest in playing roles that reinforced stereotypes. He was selective. In the 1950s and 1960s, Hollywood still gave black actors roles that lacked depth. They were often written as criminals, servants, or background characters. Poitier refused to take parts that lacked dignity. This was not just about personal pride. He understood that the roles he played shaped how black people were seen in real life. This decision limited his options. Some in Hollywood thought he was difficult. Some in the black community felt he was too careful, too willing to play noble characters instead of showing a wider range of black experiences. But Poitier had a strategy. He knew that every role he took would either reinforce or challenge Hollywood's image of black men. He chose to challenge it. He worked with directors who shared his vision, like Stanley Kramer and Martin Ritt. He picked films that tackled real issues. This made him more than just an actor. He became a symbol of progress. His choices inspired other black actors to demand better roles, setting a standard that later stars like Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman followed. Poitier's acting skills shined in Cry, The Beloved Country, in 1951. This film, based on Alan Paton's novel, told the story of racial injustice in apartheid-era South Africa. Poitier played Reverend Stephen Kumalo, a black priest searching for his son in Johannesburg. The movie exposed the deep racial divisions of South Africa, and Poitier's performance gave it even more emotional weight. Then, in 1955, Blackboard Jungle put Poitier in the spotlight again. This film was about a high school teacher trying to control a class of troubled students. Poitier played Gregory Miller, a rebellious but intelligent student. The film was a shocking look at urban schools. It also helped introduce rock and roll to mainstream audiences with its use of Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and his Comets. Both films were more than entertainment. Cry, The Beloved Country brought international attention to apartheid. Blackboard Jungle made people think about racial and social issues in American schools. Poitier wasn't just taking on roles. He was helping change conversations. In 1958, he made history with The Defiant Ones. The film told the story of two prisoners, one black and one white, who escaped while shackled together. Tony Curtis played the white prisoner. Poitier played Noah Cullen. At first, their characters hated each other. They had no choice but to work together. Slowly, their relationship changed. That was what made the film so powerful. It wasn't just about a prison escape. It was about breaking racial barriers. Directed by Stanley Kramer, the movie came out at a time when segregation was still legal in parts of the United States. It made audiences see something different. A black man and a white man could rely on each other. They could be equals. That was bold for 1958. Poitier's performance was unforgettable. He was strong, smart, and human. Hollywood had never given a black actor a leading role in a major film like this before. His work was so powerful that it earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor in 1959. It was the first time a black male actor had ever been nominated in that category. He didn't win, but the nomination alone was history. David Niven won that year for Separate Tables, but the industry had already taken notice of Poitier. He was no longer just a talented actor, he was a trailblazer. In 1961, he starred in A Raisin in the Sun, first on Broadway, then in the film adaptation. Lorraine Hansberry wrote the play, and it was the first major production to focus on a black family's struggles from their own perspective. Until then, black characters in Hollywood were usually seen through a white lens. Poitier played Walter Lee Younger, a man desperate to escape poverty and provide a better life for his family. His performance captured every bit of Walter Lee's frustration, ambition, and heartbreak. The play was a huge success. It spoke to real struggles black families faced every day. Hollywood turned it into a film in 1961 with Daniel Petrie as director. Poitier kept his role, bringing the same intensity to the screen. The film was set in Chicago, where segregation was not enforced by law, but was still a social reality. It made audiences think. Poitier's performance earned him a Golden Globe nomination, and the film later became a classic. In 2005, the Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry, proving its impact never faded. Then came Lilies of the Field in 1963. This was the role that made history. Poitier played Homer Smith, a traveling handyman who comes across a group of nuns in the Arizona desert. They believe God sent him to build them a chapel. At first, he resists, but something changes in him. He stays. He builds the chapel. The film was small, quiet, and deeply moving. Poitier played Homer with warmth and dignity. There was no big dramatic moment, just a man doing something good because he wanted to. The performance won him the Best Actor Oscar at the 36th Academy Awards on April 13, 1964. He became the first black man to win that award. It was a turning point. His acceptance speech was simple and heartfelt. He thanked those who had helped him and acknowledged the long road that had led to this moment. Hollywood was changing, but slowly. Poitier knew that winning an Oscar didn't mean everything would be different overnight. He kept pushing forward. In 1967, he starred in two films that took on race in America in different ways. The first was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, directed by Stanley Kramer. Poitier played Dr. John Prentice, a successful black doctor engaged to a white woman. The film explored how their families reacted to the relationship. It came out just months after the Supreme Court ruled in Loving v. Virginia that interracial marriage was legal across the country. The timing made it even more powerful. Some critics felt Poitier's character was too perfect, almost as if the film was making him an ideal black man to be more acceptable to white audiences. But the message was clear. Love should not be limited by race. The second film was In the Heat of the Night, directed by Norman Jewison. Poitier played Detective Virgil Tibbs, a black police officer from Philadelphia who gets caught up in a murder case in the Deep South. The town's police chief, played by Rod Steiger, is openly racist. The film was intense and full of tension. One of its most famous moments came when a wealthy white man slapped Virgil Tibbs. Poitier made sure the script had him slap back. That moment was powerful. A black man standing his ground, not backing down. Both films were major successes. In the Heat of the Night won Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Poitier had proven that films about race could be box office hits. He wasn't just an actor, he was a force. Hollywood had no choice but to change. His career had made sure of that, but with success came pressure. He wasn't just an actor, he was a symbol of progress. The roles he chose could shape how Black Americans were perceived. He picked characters that were dignified and intelligent, avoiding anything that reinforced stereotypes. This responsibility stretched beyond film. He became a vocal supporter of civil rights, standing alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and participating in protests. Everything he did, on and off the screen, was watched and judged. By the late 1960s, as the civil rights movement became more radical, some Black intellectuals started to criticize him. They felt his characters were too perfect, almost unreal. He was often portrayed as noble, controlled, and non-threatening. Some believed these roles were designed more to comfort white audiences than to reflect real Black life. Critics like Pauline Kael and Clifford Mason argued that Poitier had been boxed into a stereotype of goodness. Mason's article, "Why Does White America Love Sidney Poitier So?" published in the New York Times on September 10, 1967, accused Poitier of presenting an unrealistic image of Black masculinity. He claimed Hollywood only accepted Poitier because he was safe, a Black man who never challenged white comfort too much. One of Mason's biggest critiques was Poitier's role as Virgil Tibbs in the Heat of the Night, 1967. The film was groundbreaking, especially a scene where Tibbs slaps a white bigot. But Mason argued that the character lacked depth. He had no personal struggles or love interest, making him feel less like a real person and more like an idealized figure. Poitier was hurt by this criticism. He later called Mason's article the most devastating and unfair piece of journalism I had ever seen. He knew Hollywood was slow to change, but he also saw the limits of his success. He once said, "I can't believe that I, Sidney Poitier, am the only man of talent for films from among 20 million Negro people." His friendship with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't just for show. It was built on real admiration and a shared fight for civil rights. By the early 1960s, Poitier had become one of the most famous Black actors in Hollywood. He could have stayed away from the struggle, focusing only on his career. But that wasn't who he was. He knew his success gave him a voice, and he was determined to use it. On August 28, 1963, Poitier stood in the massive crowd at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. More than 250,000 people had gathered at the Lincoln Memorial, waiting to hear Dr. King speak. When King delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech, the moment became history. Poitier wasn't just another famous face in the crowd. He was standing alongside activists who had risked their lives for this movement. He was there with Harry Belafonte and Charlton Heston, proving that Hollywood wasn't just watching from a distance. Poitier's dedication went beyond public events. He was willing to put himself in real danger. In the summer of 1964, he and Belafonte took on a mission that could have cost them their lives. The civil rights movement was in the middle of Freedom Summer, a campaign to register Black voters in Mississippi. The state was one of the most dangerous places in America for civil rights activists. The Ku Klux Klan was attacking volunteers, and 3 had already been murdered in June. The movement needed money to keep going, and Poitier and Belafonte decided to deliver it themselves. They carried $70,000 in cash, worth over $600,000 today, and chartered a small Cessna plane to Greenwood, Mississippi. As soon as they landed, their pilot quickly took off, leaving them behind. A car was waiting, but before they could get far, they saw headlights approaching. At first, they thought it might be federal agents. Then they realized it was the Klan. A terrifying chase began. The Klan cars rammed into them, trying to force them off the road. Their driver didn't stop. He sped forward, swerving to escape. Just when it seemed they might not make it, a convoy from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee arrived. The Klan backed off, and Poitier and Belafonte reached their destination. Inside a crowded dance hall, Belafonte dropped the bag of cash onto a table. The activists cheered. That money would pay for food, transportation, and legal aid for those arrested for fighting for their rights. Poitier and Belafonte spent the night in a small room under armed guard, knowing the Klan was still outside. But they had done what they came to do. Poitier's activism wasn't just public. It was part of his daily life. His home became a meeting place for civil rights leaders. His first wife, Juanita, welcomed figures like Ruby Dee, Ossie Davis, and even Malcolm X. These weren't just casual visits. These were strategy sessions where plans for the movement were made. The risks were real. After Poitier marched to honor James Meredith in 1966, he and Juanita found a burning cross in their driveway. A clear message from those who wanted to silence him. But he never backed down. He kept using his fame, his resources, and his voice to push for change. Sidney Poitier's move into directing changed his career forever. His first film as a director, Buck and the Preacher, 1972, was more than just a Western. It was a bold story about Black resilience in the years after the Civil War. Poitier starred as Buck, a former soldier who led freed African Americans away from the South. His people were looking for a better life in the Kansas Territory, but they faced constant danger. White raiders, hired by plantation owners, hunted them down to force them back to Louisiana. Hollywood had never told a Western story like this before. Black actors rarely got leading roles in the genre, and the struggles of freed African Americans were almost never shown on screen. Buck and the Preacher also explored the complex relationship between African Americans and Native Americans. It showed moments of both tension and solidarity, breaking away from the stereotypes that Westerns usually relied on. The production was not easy. Joseph Sargent was hired to direct, but after just a few days, Poitier decided he was not the right fit. He felt Sargent's approach lacked the depth the story needed. Instead of hiring someone new, Poitier took over. He had never directed a film before, but he made the decision without hesitation. He completed shooting in just 45 days while also working on another movie, The Organization, 1971. Despite these challenges, the film was a success. Critics praised its cinematography, music, and historical accuracy. Columbia Pictures had hoped for bigger box office numbers, but the film's legacy proved far more important. The soundtrack, composed by jazz legend Benny Carter, gave the film even more cultural depth. It featured blues musicians Sonny Terry and Brownie McGhee, blending traditional blues with classic Western themes. Poitier dedicated the film to the African American pioneers, whose struggles had been erased from history. He wanted their story to be remembered. After proving himself as a director, Poitier took an unexpected turn. Instead of making another drama, he stepped into comedy. Uptown Saturday Night, 1974, was the first of 3 buddy comedies starring Poitier and Bill Cosby. The film followed 2 working-class friends who got robbed at an illegal gambling joint. The real problem? They had a winning lottery ticket in their stolen wallet. Their search to get it back pulled them into the city's criminal underworld, leading to a series of hilarious encounters. The film was not a typical blaxploitation movie. Instead of following the usual crime drama formula, it poked fun at it. The cast was packed with comedy legends, including Richard Pryor, Flip Wilson, and Roscoe Lee Brown. Audiences loved it, and critics praised the film's humor and energy. Poitier's direction kept the pace fast and the laughs constant. The movie was a box office success, proving he could handle comedy just as well as drama. Then came Stir Crazy, 1980, a film that made history. Poitier directed Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor in a prison comedy that became a massive hit. The story followed two unlucky friends who were wrongly convicted of bank robbery and sentenced to 125 years in prison. Wilder and Pryor's chemistry was electric, and their comedic timing made every scene unforgettable. Audiences loved it. Stir Crazy became the first film directed by an African American to make over $100 million at the box office. It opened with a record-breaking $13 million in its first week, the biggest opening Columbia Pictures had ever seen. The success was groundbreaking. Hollywood had never given a black director control over a major comedy like this, and Poitier proved it could be done. His achievement went beyond the numbers. He had already broken barriers as an actor, and now he was doing the same as a director. He showed that black filmmakers could create mainstream hits that appealed to all audiences. Sidney Poitier's life was filled with success, controversy, and moments of deep reflection. He married twice, first to Juanita Hardy in 1950 and later to Joanna Shimkus in 1976. His first marriage lasted over 2 decades and gave him 4 daughters. But during that time, he had a passionate and complicated affair with actress Diane Carroll. They met in 1959 on the set of Porgy and Bess. At the time, Poitier was married to Hardy, and Carroll was married to Monty Kaye. But from the moment they met, the attraction was undeniable. Poitier later described Carroll as unique, drawn to her confidence and sensuality. Their affair lasted 9 years. At one point, they agreed to leave their spouses to be together. Carroll followed through and divorced her husband. Poitier hesitated. He told Hardy about the affair, but chose to stay in the marriage for the sake of their children. Carroll, now single, began dating other men. Poitier didn't take it well. In a heated moment, he told her she belonged to him. To prove his commitment, he bought her a ring and even purchased a 10-room apartment where they would live together once he left his wife. But he had conditions. He wanted them to live together for 6 months before marrying. Carroll refused. She didn't want to wait or follow his timeline. That disagreement led to their breakup. Though the romance ended painfully, they later became friends, looking back on their past with understanding. Poitier's personal struggles often reflected his larger battles in the public eye. He made history in 1964 as the first black man to win an Academy Award for Best Actor for Lilies of the Field. But even as he broke barriers, he saw that Hollywood remained resistant to change. In the 1960s and 1970s, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences faced heavy criticism for its lack of diversity. Poitier, who had long been involved in the civil rights movement, felt the need to act. He was frustrated by the exclusion of black actors and filmmakers from nominations. In protest, he resigned from the Academy. His departure was a powerful statement about racial inequality in Hollywood. He was not alone. Other black actors like Bernie Casey also quit in frustration. Though Poitier's resignation did not bring immediate change, it added to the growing pressure on the industry to evolve. His stand against exclusion became part of his legacy, inspiring later generations to push for better representation in film. Later in life, Poitier stepped away from Hollywood and entered diplomacy. In 1997, he became the Bahamas ambassador to Japan. This role gave him a new purpose, allowing him to represent his parents' homeland on an international stage. Born in Miami to Bahamian parents, he held dual citizenship and was an ideal choice for the position. Though he never lived in Japan, his work strengthened cultural and economic ties between the two countries. He served in this role until 2007. This shift allowed him to step back from the constant public scrutiny of his film career while still making an impact. Even as he moved into new roles, Poitier never stopped reflecting on his life. He wrote 2 autobiographies that revealed his struggles, lessons, and beliefs. His first, This Life, 1980, focused on his journey from the Bahamas to Hollywood. He wrote about the racism he faced, the criticism of his accent, and the difficulty of finding meaningful roles. He also shared details about his marriage to Hardy and his affair with Carol, openly acknowledging his mistakes. His second book, The Measure of a Man, a spiritual autobiography, 2000, was different. It wasn't just about his career. It was about his values, his spirituality, and the experiences that shaped his character. He spoke about the importance of integrity, resilience, and staying true to oneself in the face of challenges. The book was well received and became a bestseller, offering readers not just a glimpse into his life, but lessons in perseverance and personal growth. Sidney Poitier's honorary Oscar in 2002 was more than an award. It was a tribute to a man who changed Hollywood forever. On March 24th, at the Kodak Theater, Denzel Washington stood on stage and spoke about Poitier's impact. Before him, black actors were often given small roles that could be cut from films. But Poitier was different. He was the reason movies were made. When Poitier stepped up to accept the award, he spoke with grace. He thanked the filmmakers who had taken a chance on him. He arrived in Hollywood at 22, at a time when success seemed impossible. Yet 53 years later, he stood on the biggest stage in cinema. He had refused to take roles that reinforced harmful stereotypes. He knew every character he played would shape how black actors were seen. His choices changed the industry. That night was historic for another reason. Washington won Best Actor for Training Day, making him the second black actor to win in that category. The first was Poitier in 1964. Washington looked toward him and said, "I'll always be chasing you, Sidney." The torch had been passed. Poitier's legacy reached beyond his films. When he passed away on January 6, 2022, at age 94, tributes came from around the world. Oprah Winfrey called him a beacon of hope. Barack Obama said he paved the way for future generations. Morgan Freeman remembered him as a mentor and friend. His films spoke for themselves. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and In the Heat of the Night tackled race and social justice when America was in turmoil. His work made people think. It forced them to see beyond race and into the heart of his characters. After his death, people wanted to know more about the man behind the legend. His memoir, The Measure of a Man, became popular again. His words revealed a deep thinker, someone who carried the hopes of an entire generation. That same year, the documentary Sidney was released. It told his story in his own words. It showed why he mattered. He wasn't just an actor. He was a leader. His influence on actors like Washington was undeniable. Their first meeting was brief but powerful. Backstage at a play, Poitier told Washington, "You're good." That was all he needed to hear. Those words stayed with him for life. By the time Washington won his Oscar, Poitier had already shaped the industry. The two moments, Poitier's honorary award and Washington's win, were forever connected. One man had opened the door. The other had walked through it.